Welcome to our participants. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes here as we get going. This is the American Security Project's National Security Implications of Climate Change in Florida event. We'll get started just in a minute as people come in and go from there. Thanks for being with us. Okay, welcome to all of our participants. This is the American Security Project's National Security Implications of Climate Change in Florida. I am Andrew Holland, COO of the American Security Project. We are honored to be joined here by Lieutenant General Norm Seip, U.S. Air Force retired. I'm going to do a brief introduction here of the American Security Project and our partner, the American Water Security Project. And then we'll turn it over to General Seip in just a minute. So thank you all for being with us. We've got a great group of folks here, and we're really excited to be starting this new program. The American Security Project is a small, nonprofit, national security think tank based in Washington, D.C., but we've done operations all around the country. We've spent the better part of the last decade bringing our board members and other national security professionals around the country to talk about the national security implications of climate change. We've been all around the country, from the places like Chicago and San Francisco and New York, but more importantly, to places like Texas and Pittsburgh and several times to Florida. Now, we're excited that this is the first event of our intensive new program to look specifically at climate security threats in Florida. This is the first time we're going to be focusing intensely on just one state for a while. And the reason we're doing that is because Florida plays such an important role in national security. Before I get into that, though, I wanted to give a thank you and an introduction to the American Water Security Project, who has partnered with us on the event. The American Water Security Project was founded in 2018 and is led by a board and staff with extensive experience in water policy, science, and advocacy. They're a team of business leaders, scientists, engineers, policy experts, and outdoor enthusiasts working to highlight the need for infrastructure upgrades to protect waters and water bodies around the country. Coalition educates on the negative effects of wastewater spills and dumps to residents, businesses, and tourism, communicates the social and ecological values of proper wastewater treatment, and advocates for remedies to correct the deficiencies. It's been great to work with the American Water Security Project, and we look forward to a strong partnership. Now, before I introduce General Seip, I wanted to go a little bit more into our Florida report and our Florida work. Florida plays really a key role in U.S. national security. It's home to the headquarters of 3 combatant commands: U.S. Central Command, U.S. Special Operations Command, and U.S. Southern Command. It houses over 20 bases representing every branch of the military. These bases provide key access to irreplaceable training grounds for U.S. pilots, to the 180,000 square miles of DoD-controlled airspace over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. And climate change poses clear risks to the onshore security assets that host those pilots. As the climate changes, risks to the military installations in Florida and to U.S. national security overall will accelerate. Now, we did a report just recently published specifically looking at Florida and climate security, and we'll drop a link to the report in the chat. We're really honored today to have ASP board member, Lieutenant General Norm Seip, U.S. Air Force retired, join us. It's great to be with you, General Seip. He was a Air Force officer for over 35 years. His last assignment was as commander of 12th Air Force, the Air Force component to U.S. Southern Command, comprised of 7 active duty wings conducting security cooperation throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. He was a command pilot with more than 4,500 flying hours, primarily in fighter aircraft, and has flown in support of numerous military operations and contingencies around the world. Currently, he's an independent consultant focused on defense and national security related matters. And we're really honored to have him with us. Before I turn it over to him, a reminder to everybody, we encourage Q&A. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions. General Seip's going to give his presentation, but then I'll moderate the Q&A, and we look forward to your questions. Please use that below. General Seip, great to be with you. Over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for dialing in to be part of this conversation on climate change and climate security and its influence and impacts, not only on Florida and its citizens and businesses, but also its host of military installations in the state, but also its impacts on our national security. And I submit to you, impacts on our energy, economic, and environmental security. So I have two objectives that I hope to accomplish today. The first one is to have a conversation between us, hopefully as a result of what I have to say today, a conversation steeped in Q&A. And just as important, my other goal is to finish talking before you finish listening, so we can get after objective one. How well I do, well, time will tell, so let's get on with it. So let's start with the basics. I submit to you that the science of climate change is well established, and the basic facts are agreed upon by over 97% of climate scientists. Simply stated, we have seen a rapid and unprecedented warming in the Earth's climate system. The arguments you've heard against them are political, not scientific, and alternative explanations have been thoroughly debunked by scientists. And it's basically, at least in my mind, only on cable news that the debate continues on. But you don't have to take my word for it. You're experiencing it up close and personal here in Florida. You know, the 2020 hurricane season was the most active on record. An average season has 12 named storms, 6 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. But last year, you in Florida saw 30 named storms. Of these 30, 12 made landfall and 6 were major hurricanes. And this is now the season with the most storms on record, surpassing the 28 from 2005. This season was also the 5th consecutive season in which at least one Category 5 hurricane formed. And this season also featured a record 10 tropical cyclones that underwent rapid intensification, tying it with 1995. Along with this upward trend, there's evidence that climate change could be weakening atmospheric currents that move weather systems along. That means that 150 mile per hour plus winds, storm surges, and storms even stalling in place like Hurricanes Harvey and Dorian are likely to become more frequent. Hurricanes are fueled by warm ocean water, and we are seeing ocean temperatures rise approximately 0.13 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. And as air temperatures also rise, the warmer air holds more moisture, leading to more rain, more flooding, and more damage. As such, the storms hitting Florida can move slower and take twice as long to break apart, increasing the potential and scope of wind and flood damage to military infrastructure and assets. Climate change in the way of rising seas, extreme storms, and extreme heat affect the day-to-day lives of Floridians and Florida businesses. But I'd submit to you again that climate change also impacts military training and readiness in Florida. Our military ranks 8 Florida bases as among the most threatened in the country by climate change. And that list includes 5 Air Force bases: Eglin, Hurlburt, Homestead, MacDill, and Tyndall, all bases that I've either been assigned to, trained at, taught at, and certainly I've flown off the ranges in the Gulf there that are just incredibly important to us in the way of training, testing, and experimentation. Also bases impacted is Patrick Space Force Base, the Naval's Naval Air Station at Key West, and the Marine Corps Blunt Island Support Facility. Rising seas threaten Florida's coastal bases with more frequent and severe tidal flooding, land loss, and storm surges. And flooding can damage infrastructure, forcing evacuations, delays in training, and interrupt our day-to-day military operations. Back in 2014, operations were disrupted here on the Panhandle at NAS Pensacola, Eglin Air Force Base, and Hurlburt Field with torrential rains, and the historic flooding that followed damaged or destroyed essential roads and bridges, rendering them inaccessible, thus closing the installations and disrupting operations. Sea level rises exacerbated king tides, or higher than normal tides, threatening coastal cities like Miami with flooding on sunny days, which saw a 320% increase in nuisance flooding. And as I made many trips to U.S. Southern Command headquarters in Miami, I remember having to pick my way around the streets in order to avoid the nuisance flooding on a very clear and sunny day. By 2050, Florida coastal bases may experience 10 times the number of floods they experience today. And if the current trends continue, by 2100, low-flying areas or low-lying areas of Eglin Air Force Base and NES Mayport are projected to be underwater for as much as 80% and 90% of the year, respectively. Now, worsening storms like hurricanes with excess rainfall and high winds can cause great damage to military installations and delay training. Only 3 years ago, in 2017, Hurricane Irma damaged 40% of the facilities and 97% of the housing at Patrick Space Force Base, and 2 launches from the Kennedy Space Center were postponed. In 2018, Hurricane Michael severely damaged 95% of the infrastructure at Tyndall Air Force Base, and critical training and maintenance was disrupted for over a month. And it cost us about $2 billion to repair 17 of Tyndall's 55 F-22s, 5th generation, top of the line fighter aircraft that were housed at Tyndall Air Force Base. And the experts are putting the rebuilding of the base at over $3 billion. In part due to the damage at Tyndall Air Force Base, our commander at Air Combat Command in our Air Force had to consider grounding combat aircraft to cut flying hours for non-deploying squadrons, just because of that cost. And such costs affect military readiness and put the U.S. national security at risk. Turning to extreme heat, it certainly limits the amount of time a person can spend outside, and you all recognize that living in Florida. It certainly has security implications for military bases such as Eglin, Tyndall, and Hurlburt. And just like our business owners who are on this call, the military puts the health and safety of its troops before all else. So when temperatures reach above 90 degrees or above, the military calls that a black flag day, which means that physical training, strenuous exercise, workout on the flight line, even going to the airplane and launching is suspended for all personnel. You can see the impact from that. And Florida right now has an average of 25 dangerous heat days or black flag days each year. But by 2050, it's projected to see 130 such days each year, more than any other state. So that's 1/3 of the year that our troops are not training. So military, in fact, does suffer. Additionally, turn no farther than a joint report from NBC News and Inside Climate News, which found over 1,800 cases of heat stroke or heat exhaustion among active duty service members in 2008. And fast forward 10 years to 2018, that figure had climbed to almost 2,800, which is an increase in 60% in just a decade. In the Marine Corps, the rate of heat stroke more than doubled over that period. And the lethal danger of extreme heat poses a risk to our service members and does have a significant financial cost. Health impacts from heat cost the military nearly $1 billion from 2008 to 2018. In addition to sea level rise, worsening storms, and extreme heat, the military is also confronted with drought and wildfires. Extreme drought is affecting operations across the United States, surprisingly even in Florida. When temperatures rise, water becomes more precious, and drought threatens water resources for bases and surrounding communities. Drought increases the chance of wildfires, which can impact operations at a base and undermine the training. In 2016, a fire near Vandenberg Air Force Base covered over 10,000 acres, forced the closure of the southern portion of the base, and delayed a critical satellite launch. It was reported that on November 27th, back here for this year's fire season, there were over 52,000 wildfires that had burned almost 9 million acres. That's approximately 2.3 million more acres burned than the 10-year average, and almost double the acreage burned in the 2019 season. And as a plug for ASP, I tell you to take a look at how climate change affects the military by going to a new website, which is basically called militaryresilience.org. I think it's a great resource for all of us to better understand the climate risks to the U.S. military. And in fact, I think you can pull from that the same climate risks that are facing us here in Florida with our businesses and our own individual lives. The military isn't just worried about the potential damage to infrastructure and readiness that climate change possesses stateside. We're also worried about national security implications of climate change abroad. We all know that problems around the world don't stay there. We certainly have an interest in a stable, predictable world, not one with civil unrest, ethnic strife, fragile governments, and failing ecosystems. Climate change alone is not likely to cause conflict, but it does exacerbate existing conditions such as water scarcity, food production, migration, overpopulation, and economic insecurity. All these issues have the potential to make conflict more likely. Weak states may become failed states. Societies may be unable to cope with the sudden shocks from hurricanes or drought and the long-term stresses that come from decreased agricultural yield brought on by climate change. Strong states may grab resources from weaker states. In a time of crisis, strong states may take advantage of weaker governments to secure increasingly scarce resources. And the climate change is creating new missions for the US military, like naval surface patrols in the Arctic. And although we always respond to humanitarian and disaster relief requests, the growth in this job jar is increasing dramatically both home and abroad. For these reasons, the military calls climate change an accelerant of instability and a threat multiplier. So let's go to some of the global hotspots, and let me do two examples of regions that are of strategic importance to the US. They suffer from fragile governments and or civil unrest. They're vulnerable to climate-induced drought, flooding, wildfire, extreme heat, and or disease-carrying and crop-destroying insects. In the first place, we'll look at South Asia, which has long been considered strategically important to the United States, and even more so now, given the growing competition with China. This region also suffers from ethnic and religious conflict and is vulnerable to climate-induced risks. South Asia is the home to the headwaters of 6 major Asian rivers, and we find that increasing Himalayan glacial melt and changing monsoon rainfall patterns, both of those are posing a threat to livelihoods and food and water security for more than 1 billion people in South Asia. China's control over the source of these major rivers gives it leverage, and it's using that leverage, and it gives it the means to extend and grow its influence in the region. As such, climate risks in South Asia could destabilize allies like the world's largest democracy in India and invite further Chinese intrusion and unrest. A second area, which I think is near and dear to all of us here in Florida and to the United States due to its close proximity, is Latin America. And this region also suffers from fragile governments and civil unrest and is increasingly vulnerable to climate change. Not only is there a risk in Central America's instability leading to what we now see as some major immigration issues, there's also a risk that destabilized countries in Latin America will become even more susceptible to the influence of transnational crime networks that could threaten the US. Furthermore, a destabilized Latin America invites further intrusion by China and Russia, and we're seeing that on a daily basis. And you can look no further than the testimony given by the commander of US Southern Command to hear those impacts by the Chinese and the Russians. So the military solution, one of it is risk management, and all of this is an argument for it, something that I believe the US military does very well. And during my 3.5 decades in the military, we were constantly assessing threats and the risks associated with the threats and the recommended action against the threats, and discussed how to minimize the risks, mitigate them, and when able, to buy down the risks. So every aspect of national security is about understanding and managing, mitigating, and buying down risks. And that means to you and I that even if you choose not to believe that human activity contributes to climate change, we can't wait until there's 100% certainty. We know that waiting for 100% certainty in the military and on the battlefield before making a decision can be disastrous. And our certainty level is well above this. You know, as I mentioned earlier, 90% of our climate scientists believe in the basic facts about climate change. And in Florida, you see it on your coast as flooding becomes more frequent. And all this argues for decisive action to reduce carbon emissions and build greater resiliency to reduce future risks. Given the direct threat to base infrastructure and more broadly to national security, your military is taking action. Congress and DoD are working to make the US military installations more resilient in the face of worsening storms, recurrent flooding, and rising sea levels. the Defense or the 2021 Defense Authorization Act expanded funding for existing programs and created others to further address military-based resilience and required DoD to update the 2014 DoD Climate Adaptation Roadmap, an action that was long overdue. And DoD is always looking for opportunities to reduce carbon emissions at its 500 installations worldwide. If I take you back to 2018, Vandenberg Air Force Base announced the completion of a new solar array system that would provide about 35% of the base's energy. They did that through emission threat analysis, and the officials determined that installing a solar array would help address vulnerabilities from potential natural disasters like wildfires and avoid any potential supply problems that could interfere with coal or natural gas power plants. And I would submit to you that even the simplest of measures can make a difference. Only a year ago, the Air Force announced that, believe it or not, testing on a KC-135 Stratotanker confirmed that something as simple as installing vertical wiper blades, vice the horizontal ones, could reduce aircraft drag by about 1% in cruise conditions. Now, you may chuckle about that, but consider that in 2019, the KC-135 fleet consumed about 14% of all Air Force aviation fuel. And the Air Force is the biggest consumer of aviation fuel in DoD. So implementing this improvement could save up to $7 million in fuel costs annually and reduce emissions. So no matter how big or small the idea is, there's opportunities for all of us, both on the civilian side of the world and here in the military, to make a difference and to contribute to reducing the impacts of climate change. DoD is also investing in the development of electric vehicles for both tactical and non-tactical use. And who knows, maybe in my lifetime, battery technology will continue to improve and we might have an EV Humvee or an EV tank. And DoD has also adopted the use of solar panels for expeditionary units, reducing the carbon emissions and the danger of resupply missions, something I was directly involved at when I was the deputy for all air operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, putting our airmen, our soldiers, Marines, sailors, as well as contractors in harm's way, dragging fuel back and forth across Afghanistan. So these are just a few examples of what DoD is doing to combat the threat posed by climate change. Certainly there's more that we could do and will do, but in our minds, leadership is critical. Given the national security threats, the U.S. must reduce carbon emissions to prevent the threats I just discussed from getting worse. And Congress plays a very important role in reducing our emissions. Two things we believe in here at ASP: that Congress must invest in climate resilient and zero carbon infrastructure, and they'll have a chance to have that debate with the president's new bill, and expand and increase funding for existing adaptation and resilience programs like the Readiness and Environmental Protection Initiative, REPI, and the Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Program. And these are just two examples where Congress can and has made a difference. So to tie a bow around this presentation, let me sum it up with this. Our elected leaders and the public should consider taking lessons from our military. We don't get it always right, but we're not afraid to lean forward and put our shoulder against a problem that needs solving. We must start by acknowledging the risks of climate change are real and growing every day. And then we must take action, whether that's individual action by you and I, community action, state or national action. I would submit to you that admiring the problem is no longer a viable option. We cannot afford to ignore the risks of a changing climate. Our economy, our environment, our daily way of life, and our nation's security depends on the actions we take today and tomorrow. So bottom line, time is no longer on our side. So that's it for my perch. I'm more than done talking, and you are probably more than done listening. So let's hear what's on your mind. Andrew, back over to you. And thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and attention.
General Seip, thank you. Certainly a sobering assessment and an important call to action, I think. I'm going to start with a question about Tyndall Air Force Base. You know, Tyndall, as we know, was really intensely damaged, almost catastrophically so, by Hurricane Matthew, back in 2019. You mentioned that the damage to F-22s. Does it make sense to you to rebuild? Of course, the Air Force has announced that they are rebuilding. They are planning to make it a base of the future, they call it. Does it make sense to rebuild, or should they relocate? What do you think can be done to harden the base against such impacts in the future?
Yeah, so Andrew, in my opinion, rebuilding is not only necessary, but it's critical just because of its location. Before I go on with that, I will tell you that one facility that was not damaged or minimally damaged during Hurricane Michael was the Air Operations Center, and that was built to the new standards that are out there. We in the military, or at least the Air Force, it's been almost 40 years since we have built a new base. So all our bases are add-ons. They're modernizations, and unfortunately, we don't have the money from an infrastructure standpoint to take everything and build it up to today's standards. So we have a chance to do it right at Tyndall. I've read the reports from the folks that are running that effort. It's very impressive as far as the technology, the building plans and ingenuity that's going to be put into it. And for no other reason, the ranges off the coast of Tyndall are critical to us. They give us the breadth and depth, the length, the height, the capabilities, the resources to fly our 5th generation airplanes, to train against the threats that we expect to come against now in this competition with the powers like the Russian and the Chinese. And it certainly plays well with our 5th generation type of weapon systems, and not just aircraft. All of that comes there. I've flown on those ranges many years ago, but again, that resource is just vitally important to the United States' national security, and vitally important to our ability from an airman standpoint to execute the responsibilities that have been levied against us by the geographic combatant commanders around the world when we have to come their way and execute their plans. Over.
Yeah, that's an important point, and thanks for making that. Sometimes we think of it as only a political choice to rebuild where it is, but to actually talk about the capabilities that a base provides is extremely important. I want to talk some. We've got a question here from Mr. Kelly, Eugene Kelly, saying climate change impacts don't distinguish between military installations and their surrounding communities. Of course, a base like Tyndall or all the other bases are it's supported by the people who are around it, the people who live off base, then work on base, and you can't have a prosperous base without a community around it to support. What should the military be doing? He asks, is the military coordinating or collaborating with those cities and communities on the adaptation, on the preparation? What's been your experience for the communications on base and off base, and what are your recommendations for that?
Yeah, collaboration is the key word, and coordination and teamwork. What we do on the military base shouldn't just be admired or looked at by the civilian community surrounding the base. We need to be helping or assisting our communities with the efforts that we're doing, the impacts that our efforts may have on them. We need to listen to their concerns, and we want to look for opportunities where we can go public-private type of partnerships where we can both benefit from improvements there. Let's face it, I think Texas showed, just as an example, our aging electrical infrastructure. The military, in fact, all the services fly many or conduct many operations 24/7 from home. They can't afford to go off the grid. So many of them are looking for resiliency by microgrids, by solar, by wind, you name it. Those type of efforts are important, can be important to the surrounding communities who want to get into this idea of, in this case, electrical power resiliency and the way to reduce the risk that might occur with storms and or the damage associated from the storm. So yeah, any good commander worth his weight is out there communicating with the leaders of the community and having an open discussion and looking at ways that we can help each other.
Yeah, exactly right. And your example from Texas is another important one. People sometimes assume that that the power for bases is generated on station, but it really is, they rely on the utility just like the community around it. And so when the utilities go down, the capabilities of the base goes down as well. There are certain backup options and such like that, but it's not as effective as having a redundant, resilient grid that we can invest in. A couple of questions here about sea level rise, and this is of course important for Florida, surrounded by sea on three sides, and its sea level rise is one of the kind of main predictions. One person here, Mr. Hansen, Terry Hansen, asks about a report from Lloyd's of London that states that 8 inches of sea level rise off the tip of Manhattan increased Sandy's surge losses by 30%. And I'd note actually that ASP partnered with Lloyd's of London for a city risk index that this number may have been pulled from. We launched that with them in 2016 and 17. You can actually go back and see the videos on our website. Would encourage folks to think about that. You know, the statement's profound. 8 inches increased damages by 30%. National Climate Assessment, of course, project that sea level rise could be 1 to 4 feet by the end of the century, and quote, a rise by as much as 8 feet cannot be ruled out. You know, when you start getting to numbers like that, certainly it becomes difficult to project what that impacts on bases in Florida, which of course is a low-lying state and the low-lying coastal state. There are protections that can be done for bases along the coast, whether it's Air Force bases or of course naval bases are all along the coast. What do you project, or what do you see as ways that these bases can protect themselves and become more resilient to effects of sea level rise and storm surge? You're muted.
I've seen the modeling and the simulation, and it is pretty significant when you talk about those various increases there. It puts a whole new look at basically the geography and the topography of our countries as far as who now is owners of oceanside land. Just a little bit of ocean rise that we've seen now, if you go down to NAS Norfolk, they are spending literally tens of millions of dollars to raise all their piers in order, because all their electrical and support to their ships run underneath those piers. They need to raise them high enough in order to continue operations. And we certainly have all, if you've been to Miami, again, as I said, you've worked your way through the clear day tides that are coming in. And the same is said there at Norfolk. There's no silver bullet. Mm-hmm. We're not, no one service or no one government organization or public organ or private organization got to solve this. To me, the idea is you've got to stop the rise in temperature. You've got to stop the melts. You've got to basically look at the long game, but you're going to have to think about the short game. And the military is challenged, or DOD has challenged all the services, particularly our combatant commanders, to go back and look at their plans and how does climate affect the execution of their plans, the viability of their plans, and how are they going to buy down the risk or mitigate the risk that now comes with the climate. So I can't answer the question other than throwing out a hope, which is not a course of action. But again, just folding our arms and just looking at it and worrying about it and saying, hey, it's too bad that your property is no longer going to be oceanfront. We've got to solve the bigger picture there, or we're going to be relocating down the road. That's long right. After you and I are gone, we're going to be relocating our installations, and that's no easy task.
Yeah, and certainly a portion of this is pure risk assessment. It's looking at costs and potential impacts, the risk of those impacts, the cost to mitigate them, and things like whether you build seawalls or you build natural barriers, natural protection, all these sorts of things. It's a way of thinking about future risks. It's not sticking your head into the sand and saying this isn't going to happen, but it's also not saying, we have to build everything for the most extreme version. It's looking at costs and benefits and risks. And sometimes the Pentagon can be pretty good at that. Not always, but sometimes they're good at that.
Yeah, no question for me.
Yeah. There's a question here that's near and dear to my heart, and maybe I'll just take it, but you can chime in on it as well. There's a question from Mr. Gardner here that says, how far off are the Navy and Air Force in the application of Lockheed Martin's compact fusion reactor for ships and aircraft? What's the potential impact? Could the savings in fossil fuel be? So I'm going to start on this because I've worked on fusion power for a while, and something that I think is the long-term goal for American leadership, American scientific leadership, and climate policy and everything like this is getting to this. I have actually talked to the scientists working on the Lockheed Martin project there. What I'd say is that they're one of nearly 20 different companies working on fusion power, fusion research, and several of them are working on these sort of small applications. I don't know that we'll see something that looks like a F-16 flying on fusion power for a while, but certainly there's a lot of interest and support going towards space command work, and fusion power as an impulse power for deep space missions. There's actually going to be a DARPA and ARPA-E and Space Command joint workshop at the end of this month on compact fusion research there. And so this is something that's happening. It's moving forward, and some people think of it as science fiction, but these, just look at how fast technology has developed in microchips, in aerospace applications, stealth applications, all this sort of stuff. These things are happening and can happen sooner than we expect. Any comment from you, General Seip, on that?
Yeah, first, I think you planted that question since you're leading the charge at ASP. Second, I can certainly talk solar and I can talk wind, but as a Latin American history major, I can't talk fusion. But I did say the word solar, and I did say the wind. That is has been a great employer of our veterans out there. That's and right. Hopefully, again, not a course of action, but hopefully Congress will help with some incentives and stimulus that will allow our vets to get back to work in those two industries where they're high paying and they're very satisfying to our vets. Over.
Question here about hardening bunker hangars. Hardening hangars, Mr. Major writes about at Tyndall, why not build concrete bunker hangars? Places like Iceland has many of those. I visited a Norwegian air base a few years ago in the Arctic, and all of the hangars there were built to standards, of course, to protect aircraft against attack from first Soviet and then Russian attack. But are things like this a way to protect from storms? He also asks about natural or man-made EMP, electromagnetic pulse events, stuff like this. Are there things that we can do to actually physically harden infrastructure like this?
Yeah, I think there sure is, and the folks that are leading the rebuild there at Tyndall Air Force Base, with the support of many organizations, I won't say I've been given a clean sheet of music, but certainly close to a clean sheet of music as far as how do we rebuild Tyndall, and how do we make it more resistant? What are the standards we need to put into place? How much of that risk do we want to take with those standards, as far as do we go all the way, or do we bet that the next storms will be less and we can withstand there? So all that evaluation is going on. And I don't think we're going to build old. We're not going to rebuild old as far as what we see in the way of our structures that are going to house our airplanes, house our people, and house our workforce there. Will it all be, I won't call it gold plated, but all set to the highest of standards? Maybe so, based on the importance of that base and not having to repeat ever down the road, with the idea that we build so that we can grow and modernize the facilities to meet new standards if climate change continues to be such a threat that it is there. But I would refer folks to some of the reports that are out there to the public as far as how we are rebuilding Tyndall and how we're trying to modernize not just our Air Force bases, but all our military installations to be less susceptible to the new climate impacts we're seeing out there. Over.
Yeah, absolutely right. There's a question here about uncertainty, uncertainty in future climate predictions. And of course, there is, we talked, your first slide there was talking about, we are certain that the climate is changing and that it is going in one direction, but there is uncertainty in science, and we don't know kind of the bands and how bad things could get and everything like this. How do you deal with uncertainty in such an environment when you're planning for the future? Maybe not even just for climate science, but just how does the military think about uncertainty in situations like this?
Well, with any uncertainty, I think you put assumptions around those uncertainties, and you're always then questioning your assumptions as far as whether they're going to play out and be true or not. You build your plan based on your assumptions. You put your cost against those assumptions. But a wise planner is also looking for, I'll call it a branch plan in case that assumption goes wrong, so that you do have a way to accommodate for maybe a misjudgment in the assumptions you made, in the costs that you're going to incur, the actions you're going to take there. Again, it's an ongoing, we're not the experts on it completely, but again, working with our partners, both in the community, with the industry, with all the agencies and a whole of government approach there. It's not going to be one individual that says this is the answer and this is the way we're going to go, other than maybe the president. But it's going to take a lot of inputs from a lot of people with a lot of modeling and simulation. Again, a lot of assumptions, stated risks, and what we're willing to do and to mitigate that risk and buy down. And what's the cost with our actions that we take vis-a-vis other things in the economy, vis-a-vis our individual lifestyles, vis-a-vis our way of life. Over.
Yeah. Question here from Sarah Hannon. She talked about potentially using electric vehicles on the ground, but and it's rightfully said that it's extraordinarily difficult to do that for aircraft. Are there, what's your projections looking out for aviation fuels or replacement for petroleum-based fuels in a sustainable way for aircraft? The Air Force, of course, is the #1 fuel user in the DoD, and the DoD is the #1 fuel user in the country. What do you think for looking out into the future? They've tried biofuels and certified many of the airframes to fly on biofuels, but do you see other technologies or are biofuels something that we should be doubling down on? What do you see out there in the future on this?
Yeah, I don't have a comment as far as whether we ought to double down or not, but I think we ought to certainly continue to pursue biofuels that have somewhat taken a vacation over the last 4 or 5 years based on just the way things were. But there's much promise in that. The question is, and we brought the cost down, and we can use the same infrastructure to do advanced biofuels. Now the question becomes, is there an appetite for it, so to speak, and how far do we want to go? Look no further than publications like Aviation Week, and there's lots of discussion on electric aircraft or electric powered aircraft. More to follow on that. I know within the military, we're doing some experimentation and research there, but in some ways, those things are a bit off in the future. But we ought to be looking for energy choices. We shouldn't have to rely on just one source of energy, and I get it. For the next 10 or 20 years, we're tied to carbon. We ought to be looking for choices down the road, whether it come from advanced bio, whether it come from fusion, whether it come from the things that are going on from the standpoint of electric base. More to follow on that. I think based on what we're seeing with climate change, I think there'll be more continued appetite to look at things to buy down or increase our energy security and buy down the cost and the impacts of climate on our biofuels as well as just our day-to-day operations.
Yeah. When we talk about prioritization of these issues, we here we are talking about impacts of climate change on security and projecting out for this. There's a question here from Andrew Erdl saying, the Navy and Air Force they talk about this sort of stuff, But when you look at actual budgets, hard budgets, they are going towards procurement. They're going towards buying, new multi-billion-dollar attack submarines. They're going towards new B-21 stealth bombers. They're going towards replacement of the nuclear fleet, the nuclear weapons fleet, all these sorts of things. How should we look at these sort of budget trade-offs and the differences we see there?
I guess from a high-end perspective, and
Yeah.
I've spent very little time, at that top level type of engagement.
Yeah.
But DoD and the whole of government are talking their own prioritizations and the impacts of their prioritizations on others. Big picture wise, I'd submit to you that economic security, environment security, national security, all play together. And a decision in one has impacts on the other, and they all need to be considered as far as what those impacts are. But as far as where we stand with, the purchases that the person that asked the question came from, vis-a-vis how we're going to contend with things like biofuels and alternative fuels there. I won't say we leave it to our leadership. It needs bottom-up influencing there, but from a big picture standpoint, many times our combatant commanders out there, they're going to execute the plans, need to relay their concerns to the leadership as far as what they need. Do they need a new version of the F-22, or do they need biofuels because of the distances and the lack of resources, or the scarcity of resources, or the fragility of the resource system in place there? So that's a long discussion. That's a deep discussion, and you're talking about go fast, go bigger. But at the same time, we've got some inertia there that needs to be overcome as far as what our priorities are, what we need to buy in the future, and how we're going to buy it and how we're going to prioritize it.
Yeah, I think some of these questions they go up to national priorities and what are the actual missions that Congress and the president give to the military, and I think there's a good case to be made that the mission set, as large as the military budget is, the mission set is even larger, and so that leads to a real challenge in terms of trade-offs and cuts and everything like that. That's not to say there aren't places that you can find money in a $700 billion budget, but certainly a lot of the work on climate change and security is one of these things where it's either you pay now, oftentimes you pay less for prevention versus paying for recovery afterwards. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, sort of thing, right?
Look, a go-do from the president is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And when the president, early in his administration, told DoD to get after climate change, guess what? The SecDef and the chairman pushed that down and said, "You heard the boss. Let's get after climate change, and here's the way we're going to do it as far as the process that we're going to follow and the things we want to look at." Over.
Yeah, thanks. And I've got a couple of questions here that touch on politics, and maybe I'll jump on that grenade for you, sir. Somebody asks about is the military hindered when political leaders don't believe in climate change, and also questions about do you think people could be using climate as an excuse for a background? And I got asked this question when I was testifying before Congress a year ago, and by a senator, and I said, I'm not jumping out on that, and I'm not gonna advocate for a background. Certainly, sometimes these things could get it could get forced. As far as the politics of where leadership believes or doesn't believe, it certainly doesn't help. And as you said, an affirmative statement by the president does push this a lot and does kind of push it down the command structure a lot. Part of what the thing about politics is that chemistry doesn't care what you believe. Chemistry, it doesn't matter that the atmosphere doesn't matter what you think about it. It's gonna do this, and science is gonna go where it's gonna go. So those are just the last sort of things I'd say about this. I'm gonna kind of close up here with one final question. What are your, in the big picture, what is the DoD's role here versus what's Congress' role? What's the role here for the general public for preparing for and thinking about the national security impacts of climate change and climate change overall? Just an opportunity here to, what's the big picture and where should we be going?
Wow. I was hoping for a yes, no question to get off. Hey, the bottom line is we have to listen to each other. Yeah. We got to stop holding our arms and sitting across the table. And if you don't agree with me, I don't want to listen to you. Let's face it, Congress provides the money. The administration and our whole government decide the priorities. And we, in the military portion of this chain of events there, we execute what we're given. We execute the priorities that our civilian leaders should give us. And we make comments and we provide feedback. And if we think there's a better way of doing it, there's forums to do that. So that's all about democracy, as imperfect as it may be. But it is a team sport. Many times it's a contact sport. But you got to do more than just get a I participate ribbon. You've got to roll up your sleeves and get involved, or you don't get the chance to sit back and go, I told you so.
General Seip, thank you. I couldn't think of a better note to end on here. Thanks to all of our participants. We've had a great group here with us. We've got all these great questions. Go to our website, www.americansecurityproject.org. You can see more about our Florida climate project there. You can also read our report on Florida bases and climate. We look forward to continuing this conversation. We're going to have another one of these virtual events in a couple of months. But we're really looking forward to getting back to doing things in person and live. And so when things calm down on that front, we're looking forward to doing more in person, going around Florida, talking about these important impacts and really organizing folks down there. So, if you've enjoyed watching this, follow us on Twitter at amsecproject.org, go to our website, Facebook, all these sorts of places. Just sign up and we'll keep you informed about things that we're doing and look forward to seeing you down in Florida. And I look forward to getting down there and seeing you all soon. So thanks for being with us. General Seip, thank you for all of your guidance and support to us over the years and for this as well. So thanks to everybody. This will all be on our website. Look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you.